What if I told you the Big 12 might be the most chaotic conference in college football this season? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. Draft Yoda here. We're data driven and prospect focused. Traditionally, we're talking prospects, but right now, we're doing our top eight for the conferences, and next up is Big 12. Okay. As always, I am Draft Yoda himself, Bill Workman, your favorite draft nerd's favorite draft nerd. And honestly, this might be one of the most fun conferences to break down because the Big 12 is built for chaos. There may not be an obvious superpower that feels untouchable from day one, but there's a lot of good teams. You got Texas Tech, Utah, BYU, TCU, Arizona State, Houston, West Virginia, and a bunch of teams that are scooting around there that are, the Houstons of the world, the Arizona, I already said Arizona State and Houston. But so we went through and put together the full schedule, did wins, did losses, just like we do with all of these, and pulled out our top eight. But I don't just want to rank them. I also want to talk about the games that kind of change each team's season. Because one upset can really screw up a title run. One rivalry loss can cost you a lot. One late season collapse can knock you out of the championship conversation. So let's get into it. Before I get into the top eight, let me pause for a second. Baylor and Kansas State were just outside of the top eight for me. Both teams had arguments to get in. Baylor, with wins over Auburn and Colorado early in the season, but they had losses against Arizona State, TCU, UCF, BYU, and Texas Tech that kept them from really climbing. Kansas State, started off 3-0, but really struggled once they got into Big 12 with losses to Cincinnati, Houston, Arizona State, TCU, and Arizona, which put them just outside of my top eight. Because number 8 is Arizona. And they finished at 7-5. And this team had a season of full swings. You beat Northern Arizona, lose to BYU, beat NIU, and Washington State. And you pick up conference wins over Cincinnati, West Virginia, Iowa State, and Kansas State. And that's why they made the cut. They have the same record as Baylor and Kansas State, but Arizona's win over West Virginia and Kansas State matter in this scenario when it comes down to head-to-head matchups, and that's what pushed them into the top eight. The game that changes Arizona's season is that win over West Virginia. That win showed that they weren't just beating up on the lower tiered teams in the conference. West Virginia is another team we're going to talk about that's higher than them. And beating them matters because it gives Arizona some extra credibility. Then later in the season, they win over Kansas State, helped them for the argument of the top eight. They did lose. They did lose their rivalry at the end of the season, which kept them at 7-5 instead of being 8-4. But a rivalry win pushes them to 8-4, and we're talking about a bigger surprise for them in the conference. It's a very thin line in this conference. Number 7 is West Virginia. Mountaineers finish 8-4. It's one of the more interesting resumes in the conference. You got wins over Coastal Carolina, UT Martin, Virginia, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. That's a 5-0 start. That's huge. And then they lose to Arizona. They beat Cincinnati. They lose to TCU. They lose to Texas Tech. And then they turn around and beat Kansas and Houston before losing to Utah. I think West Virginia is a good team. They're just not a great team. And they have stretches in this schedule where, to have Arizona, Cincinnati, TCU, and Texas Tech in a 4-game stretch is rough. It really is. the game that changes West Virginia's season is the Houston. After the losses to TCU and Texas Tech, you could see West Virginia spiral if they don't beat Houston. And I think beating Houston is the springboard that gets them back to 8-4. Otherwise, you could really see them, close the season with 5 straight losses, which isn't outside the realm of possibilities. But I think they're a good enough team to where that doesn't happen. Number 6 on the list is Houston. They finish as a 9-3. Houston starts fast. Oregon State. They beat Texas Tech early in the season. Georgia Southern, UCF, Kansas State, Oklahoma State. I think they start 7-0. And the biggest piece of that start is obvious. Houston beating Texas Tech. I'll go over Texas Tech when we get to them. But that's a higher seeded team that they beat. And it's truly one of the top ranked teams in the conference. To me, Texas Tech is. And that shows that there is, there's legitimacy in Houston. Even with losses, to Utah later in the season, with losses to West Virginia and Baylor later in the season, that 7-0 start really shows that there is something in Houston that can catch fire and potentially at one point, really push for a Big 12 championship. I think beating Texas Tech early in the season, because Texas Tech is still going to be trying to find themselves in the first 3 games, really shows their ceiling. But late season losses show their inconsistency and just how unready for the moment I feel like Houston is this year. But they've got a solid team and they can definitely make some noise. Another team that can definitely make some noise is Arizona State, having finished in at 9-3. And they had an early loss to Texas A&M. And they lose to Texas Tech. But beating Kansas, Baylor, Hawaii, Kansas State, Colorado, UCF, Oklahoma State, and Arizona, strong season for them. The other loss they have is BYU, who we'll discuss here in a few minutes as well. I think the game that changes their season is the Kansas State game. Coming off a Texas Tech loss, Kansas State is the game that helps stabilize Arizona State for the second half of the season, and really keeps them from falling into a rough patch for them. Because Texas Tech, Kansas State, BYU in 3 games is not a fun part of your season. But you need to win that Kansas State game, and I have them winning it, which keeps them at 9-3. Number 4, TCU. This is where the rankings kind of get a little tough. TCU finishes 10-2. I have them beating North Carolina to open the season. Obviously they beat Grambling and Arkansas State. They beat UCF. They beat BYU and Baylor, West Virginia, Kansas and Arizona, and Kansas State. The problem is the 2 losses are teams that are later in the season are going to be very difficult for them. The key game for TCU is the BYU game. It's a major statement. I think BYU finishes ahead of them, but that's because they have the same record but 1 less conference loss. But that's beyond the point. We'll get to them in a minute. Beating BYU is a major statement for TCU. They have a transfer quarterback from Harvard that I'm really high on. I really think the Horned Frogs have a competitive team this year, and I think BYU is one of those measuring stick games where TCU says, look, we are building. We're good enough to compete for the Big 12 title. And while they may lose to Utah and Texas Tech, who eventually end up higher than them, it puts them in the upper echelon of the conference. And that's where you want to be if you're a team building. That's what I think TCU is. I think they're a dangerous resume and a building team. I just think there's a little bit of a gap ultimately between TCU and the number 3 team and the top 2 teams. Number 3 is BYU. Again, they finished 10-2. They beat Utah. That's their big win of the game, a big game of the season. I think if they beat Utah, it puts them in the top 3. You play TCU and Notre Dame. I think you lose to Notre Dame. But beating Utah kind of gives you that, hey, yeah, we lost to Notre Dame, but look, we beat a team that I believe in Utah that's going to be in the conference championship game. And it's the TCU game is the one reason I don't have them higher, is I do think they end up slipping up against TCU, which it's just a matchup thing for me. But that's why they're at 3. Number 2, I have Utah. They're 11-1. They're a legitimate case for number 1. I have them beating Arkansas, Utah State, Idaho, Iowa State, Kansas, Colorado, Houston, Cincinnati, Arizona, TCU, West Virginia. It's an excellent season for them. Their defense is going to be physical. Their identity is very clear. And the wins against Houston, TCU, and West Virginia give Utah one of the best resumes in the conference. But the one loss is going to hurt them, and that's BYU. I think that's truly the separator. That loss to BYU is the difference between us talking about them as a true national championship contender and just a strong Big 12 team. I think that's what it comes down to. The number 1 team is Texas Tech. I do think they get a hiccup early on. They beat Abilene Christian, they beat Oregon State, and then they lose to Houston, and I think that's a wake-up call for them. And I think they come out against Sam Houston and kind of find their rhythm with Sam Houston and Colorado, and then they just go on a tear. That puts them at 11-1. And I think the teams they beat are some of the better teams in the conference later in the season. I mean, they go on a run where you have Arizona State, Cincinnati, Arizona, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Baylor, TCU. That's how they end their season. I think they can go on a run that, all those games start to show Texas Tech as the team that we think they can be, and start showing, their younger quarterback off and showing some of the other pieces on that offense, and more importantly, that defense. I think that defense is going to be really good this year. But that early season loss is the game that kind of changes their season. I don't think it's a bad loss, but I think it's a wake-up call for them. I think they have a wake-up call. They hit the rally button, and they turn around and beat Arizona State after a bye, handle Arizona, whoop up on West Virginia, beat down the Bears of Baylor, and they kind of put the final nail in the coffin with the TCU game. And that's what kind of puts them as the best team in the Big 12, because TCU is going to come into that game 10-1 if everything I have is correct. TCU is going to come in that game 10-1. Texas Tech is going to come into that game 10-1, and that's going to be a statement game for them. So kind of a second game for them. But that Houston game, I think, really springboards them. But that's my top 8 teams in the Big 12. Number 8 Arizona, number 7 West Virginia, number 6 Houston, number 5 Arizona State, number 4 TCU, number 3 BYU, number 2 Utah, number 1 Texas Tech. I think this is the wildest conference because the margins are very thin. Everybody's going to beat up on everybody else. And it's going to be a chaotic season for them. And it's not going to be very predictable. This is just my best shot at it. Okay. But that's me. That's my number 1 team in Texas Tech in the Big 12. Is it Utah? Is it BYU? Is it a team I didn't discuss? Drop your comments down below. If you think I missed a team in the top 8, tell me that as well. I love college football. I watch college football for the NFL draft prospects and for the love of the game itself. If you enjoy prospects for the NFL and college football, make sure you hit that like, subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep putting in work. Our goal is to have over 100 prospects ready for college football kicks off this year. As always, I am Draft Yoda himself, Bill Workman, your favorite draft nerd's favorite draft nerd. And we'll catch you guys in the next one.